Between late May and September of 1798, an estimated 30,000 people died across the Kingdom of Ireland in a republican uprising that would reshape the constitutional relationship between Britain and Ireland. Yet the rebellion remains largely absent from British historical memory and school curricula outside specialist courses. This video uses artificial intelligence to reconstruct the visual landscape of that conflict. The images you will see are interpretive reconstructions based on contemporary accounts, maps, and archaeological evidence. Small inconsistencies may appear, but the technology allows us to walk through these events with a precision that written sources alone cannot provide. We begin with the Society of United Irishmen, a coalition of Presbyterian reformers and Catholic peasants seeking parliamentary representation and an end to British rule. We follow the rebellion's eruption in Wexford and the southeast, the brief northern rising in Antrim and Down, the arrival of a French expeditionary force under General Humbert at Castlebar in Mayo, and the decisive engagement at Vinegar Hill. We then examine the systematic repression that followed, the passage of the Acts of Union in 1800, and the deliberate erasure of these events from official British memory across 2 centuries. The Society of United Irishmen was founded in Belfast in October 1791 by a coalition of Presbyterian merchants and professionals who found themselves excluded from meaningful representation despite the city's commercial significance. Wolfe Tone, a Dublin barrister of Anglican background, addressed volunteer veterans and articulated a programme that proved remarkably durable. Union amongst Irishmen of every religious persuasion to secure complete reform of Parliament and diminish English influence over Irish affairs. Within weeks, a Dublin branch had formed, drawing together Protestant, Catholic and dissenter from the outset. The movement drew inspiration from 2 Republican precedents across the Atlantic. The American Revolution had demonstrated that colonial subjects could successfully separate from Crown authority and establish representative government. The French Revolution, unfolding as the society took shape, offered a more radical vision of universal citizenship, abolishing hereditary privilege entirely. These examples circulated through pamphlets, newspapers and correspondence amongst reformers who increasingly viewed the Anglican monopoly on Irish Parliament as both anachronistic and insupportable. By May 1794, after a French emissary's contact with United leaders became known to authorities, the society was proscribed and forced underground. The following year, United agents extended their alliance to the Defenders, a largely Catholic agrarian secret society operating across the Midlands and Ulster. Despite condemnation from the Catholic hierarchy and threats of excommunication, this coalition between Presbyterian radicals and Catholic smallholders grew rapidly through 1795 and 1796, united by the prospect of republican government and separation from Britain. In December 1796, that prospect appeared imminent when General Lazare O'Keefe commanded a French fleet carrying 15,000 veteran troops into Bantry Bay on Ireland's southwest coast. Wolfe Tone sailed with the expedition. Storms prevented any landing, and after 6 days, the fleet dispersed back to Brest. But the episode transformed United Irish recruitment. Membership surged as French intervention shifted from abstract possibility to demonstrated intent. By early 1797, martial law had been restored across Ulster, and leadership of the conspiracy passed southward to Dublin, where preparations for armed insurrection proceeded with increasing urgency and diminishing coordination. Throughout 1797 and the opening months of 1798, the Government of Ireland intensified a campaign of violent interrogation and collective punishment across the counties where conspiracy was suspected. Troops were granted free quarters in suspect townlands, compelling households to feed and lodge soldiers who systematically destroyed property and livestock. Interrogations employed flogging, half-hanging, and the pitch cap, a linen cone filled with hot tar fixed to a prisoner's scalp and set alight. Magistrates deported hundreds without trial. The campaign was designed to shatter the United Network before it could move, but its effect was to convince thousands that rebellion was now their only recourse. On the 10th of March, 1798, almost the entire Leinster Provincial Committee was seized at Oliver Bond's house in Dublin, the result of intelligence provided by Thomas Reynolds, a silk merchant and committee member who had turned informer. William James McNeven, Thomas Addis Emmet, and crates of correspondence were taken. Within days, Arthur O'Connor was arrested crossing to England, and the United Network in Britain was broken. On the 30th of March, the Irish administration declared martial law across the kingdom, whilst civil courts remained nominally open, a duality that permitted military violence without legal constraint. By May, the conspiracy had lost its national structure. Lord Edward Fitzgerald, the one remaining director at liberty, went into hiding. With Samuel Neilson and the Shears brothers, he resolved upon a general rising for the 23rd of May. On the 19th, Fitzgerald was cornered in a house on Thomas Street and mortally wounded, resisting arrest. The Shears brothers were betrayed on the 21st. On the morning of the 23rd, Neilson was seized and troops occupied the assembly points designated for a Dublin rising. Only the Munster-bound mail coach was halted that night at Johnstown near Naas in County Kildare. Just after dawn on the 24th of May, the first scattered clashes erupted across Kildare and northern Wexford. With no coordinating authority, no unified plan, and no promise of French support, thousands rose nonetheless. What followed was not the disciplined republic its architects had envisaged, but a convulsion driven by local fury and the weight of repression already endured. In the southeastern county of Wexford, the government crackdown that had paralysed the planned rising elsewhere forced the conspiracy into the open through miscalculation and fear. On the evening of 26 May, members of the North Cork militia arrived in the county and began burning the homes of suspected United Irishmen, a tactic that had proven effective in breaking resistance further north. The following morning, a Catholic priest named Father John Murphy, who had led his congregation in swearing an oath of loyalty to the Crown only months earlier, assembled several hundred men armed with pikes fashioned from agricultural implements and led them against a detachment of militia encamped on Lart Hill. The government force numbered approximately 100 men equipped with muskets and a single artillery piece. By the afternoon of 27th of May, the militia had been routed and their weapons seized, and the rising that Dublin Castle believed it had suppressed began to spread rapidly across the fertile lowlands of the southeast. Within 3 days, rebel columns, armed predominantly with pikes, had converged on Wexford town itself, which fell on $30 May after brief resistance. From the town jail, insurgents released Bag Enal Harvey, a Protestant landowner and committed member of the Society of United Irishmen, who was given nominal command of what would become a force estimated at 20,000 men at its peak. The rebels established a functioning administration in the county, collected customs duties and organised supply lines, whilst government troops concentrated their strength along the approaches to Dublin. On 5th June, Harvey led an assault on the strategic town of New Ross to the west, intending to break the containment and spread the rising into Munster. The attack failed after prolonged street fighting that cost both sides several hundred dead. In the hours following the defeat, rebel forces at Scullabog burned a barn in which they had confined loyalist prisoners, killing an estimated 200 men, women and children. The massacre, which occurred without the sanction of the rebel leadership, demonstrated the sectarian fury that ran beneath the republican rhetoric of the United Irishmen, a fury born from decades of dispossession under the penal laws and inflamed by the brutality of the government's suppression campaign. By early June, the insurgents controlled much of County Wexford, but their attempts to expand beyond it had been contained by disciplined volleys and artillery at Carlow, Ennick and Arklow. By the third week of June, the government had assembled sufficient force to retake the county of Wexford and suppress what remained of its rebel administration. On Vinegar Hill, a low rise above the town of Ennis Cuerdy on the River Slaney, an estimated 13,000 insurgents had established a fortified camp that served as the last coherent stronghold of the rebellion in the southeast. Families sheltered amongst crude earthworks and makeshift shelters, whilst companies of pikemen drilled under officers who had emerged from the month's fighting with some claim to military authority. The position commanded the surrounding plain and the river crossing, but it possessed neither the elevation nor the defensive works required to withstand coordinated assault by regular forces equipped with field artillery. On the morning of 21st June, 13,000 government troops under General Gerard Lake and the newly arrived Commander-in-Chief Cornwallis moved to encircle the hill from 4 directions. Lake's plan called for simultaneous convergence by 4 columns, closing the ring before the rebel force could disperse. The assault opened shortly after dawn with sustained artillery fire directed onto the summit from the south and west. The rebels possessed several captured cannon but lacked trained gun crews and sufficient powder to sustain counter-battery fire. As shot and shell tore through the encampment, pikemen formed and charged downhill against the British line, attempting to close the distance before grapeshot could decimate their ranks. The charges broke against disciplined musket volleys and canister fire at ranges too great for edged weapons to reach. By mid-morning, the southern column had failed to close its segment of the encirclement, leaving a gap through which several thousand rebels withdrew in relative order toward the Wicklow Mountains. The remainder scattered as government forces overran the summit. Contemporary estimates placed rebel dead at approximately 1,000, though precise figures could not be established amidst the confusion of retreat and pursuit. The artillery had achieved what infantry alone might not have managed against superior numbers, and the Republic of Wexford, which had governed the county for less than 4 weeks, collapsed with the fall of its final defensive position. Wexford town was reoccupied without resistance on 21st June, and organised rebel activity in the county ended within days. If reconstructing events like this matters to you, consider becoming a channel member. Your support allows the careful research and visualization that documenting these moments requires. We will now turn to the aftermath across the island. In the north, the Presbyterian conspiracy had held back. When the call came from Dublin on the 23rd of May, the Ulster Directory had counselled delay, awaiting French support that did not arrive. By early June, younger officers forced the question. Henry Joy McCracken, a Belfast cotton manufacturer and founding member of the society, took command in Antrim, and on the 7th of June led perhaps 4,000 men against the garrison town of Antrim itself. The attack failed through want of coordination, and by the 9th the rising had collapsed. 4 days later, at Ballynahinch in County Down, a second attempt ended in rout. The northern conspiracy, which had given birth to the United Irishmen 7 years earlier, had spent itself in less than a week. A.E. On the 22nd of August, 3 months after the rebellion had begun and 6 weeks after Vinegar Hill, a French expeditionary force under General Humbert landed unexpectedly at Kill-Aichla on the coast of Mayo. The Republic had sent 1,000 regular infantry, veterans of the Rhine campaigns, and within days some 5,000 local peasants had joined them. On the 27th at Castlebar, Humbert met 6,000 militia in open battle. The encounter became known as the Races of Castlebar. The government line broke and fled in disorder, abandoning arms and artillery. Humbert proclaimed an Irish Republic and installed a provisional government of Connaught, but no other counties rose to support him. By early September, government forces under Cornwallis had closed the ring. On the 8th at Ballynamuck in County Longford, the French surrendered under terms. The Irish peasants who had fought alongside them were shown no such mercy. 2 weeks later, at Kill-Aichla, an estimated 2,000 insurgents were killed in a single day. A second French squadron carrying 3,000 men was intercepted off Lough Swilly on the 12th of October. Aboard one of the captured frigates was Wolfe Tone himself, returned at last in French uniform. Sentenced to hang as a traitor, he cut his own throat in his cell on the 19th of November and died 8 days later. The rebellion that had begun in late May, with pikes and green banners across Wexford, ended in a Dublin prison, with the death of the man who had first imagined it. In the 18 months that followed the suppression of the uprising, the government moved to eliminate the constitutional structure that had permitted such widespread conspiracy to flourish beneath parliamentary oversight. Prime Minister William Pitt and Chief Secretary Robert Stewart, Viscount Castlereagh, pursued the Acts of Union through a campaign of systematic inducement, offering peerages, pensions and outright purchase of parliamentary seats to secure the necessary votes within the Irish Commons. On the 1st of January 1801, the separate Kingdom of Ireland ceased to exist, its legislature abolished, and Westminster assumed direct governance of the island through the newly constituted United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland. The violence itself was rarely acknowledged in official discourse with precision. Estimates of the dead ranged between 10 and 30,000 across the 4 months from late May through September 1798, the highest concentration occurring in County Wexford, yet no monuments mark the sites of mass burial, and British historical accounts minimised both the scale of insurgent mobilisation and the severity of government reprisal. Where the Easter Rising of 1916 would achieve canonical status in Irish nationalist memory through a compact martyrology and defined leaders executed at Kilmainham, the rebellion of 1798 remained fragmented across dozens of engagements, its leadership decapitated before coherent narrative could form, its 30,000 dead dispersed across unmarked graves in fields that returned to tillage within the year. The memory survived not through state commemoration, but through popular culture transmitted orally and in ballad. Songs such as The Wearing of the Green and Boule Vogue preserved names, dates and grievances within Catholic communities where formal historical education remained sparse. Wolfe Tone, who had died by his own hand in a Dublin jail cell in November 1798 after the failure of the final French expedition, was retrospectively elevated to founding father status by successive waves of Irish republicanism, his vision of a non-sectarian republic invoked by movements whose actual composition often contradicted that principle. The rebellion had failed to establish its republic, but it had demonstrated that large-scale mobilisation against the Crown remained possible, and that demonstration would not be forgotten, however thoroughly the official record sought to obscure the cost. Today, Vinegar Hill is a field of pasture without official monument. The Acts of Union, which followed in 1800, abolished the separate Kingdom of Ireland, bringing it under Westminster's direct rule as the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland. It would be 118 years before the Easter Rising of 1916 attempted what the United Irishmen had failed to accomplish. The rebellion itself claimed an estimated 30,000 lives across 4 months, making it the most concentrated episode of violence in Irish history to that point. For decades, it was recalled primarily through loyalist horror at sectarian massacre and Republican celebration of martyrdom. Only in the late 20th century did 1798 begin to be recognised, cautiously and with dispute, as the foundational moment of modern Irish nationalism, a republic declared briefly in Wexford, sung into memory and carried forward through ballad and commemoration long after the last Pike was buried.